Hi all, and welcome to Data Lens, the short series where we talk about market research in the outdoor hospitality industry. Today, I'm here with Scott Barr, the president of Cairn Consulting Group. With over 35 years of market research experience, Scott has a wealth of knowledge to share, and I'm here to ask him the questions that you want to know. So let's hop in. On today's episode, we'll be talking about data gaps and data ends, how to move forward when numbers don't tell the whole story. So Scott, initially, any kind of thoughts, comment, questions?
Data gaps are going to occur in your research. It's going to happen. As much as we try to avoid it, it happens. And it's something that we deal with on a consistent basis. And our experiences show that the more you address these gaps head on, the better off you are. And there's almost always something behind what's going on there. So that's what we'll be talking about today, is what that's all about and then what to do about it.
Kicking things off here. So Scott, what do you do when available data doesn't answer your key questions?
The first thing that you typically do is take a look at your data again. Take a look at what you have. In some instances, there's a way of looking at what you have on hand and finding at least a partial answer to that from your results. If, for example, maybe there's a subgroup that you didn't address. Maybe you need to peel off some of the results from a different section and look at those a little bit differently. So that's the first thing you should do, is just really exhaustively go through what you have on hand to make sure that you can't fill that gap even partially with what you have. For example, in some studies, a similar question will be asked a couple of different ways. And it's the results are almost always never going to match, because there's a reason why you asked it two different ways, because you're kind of looking at it from a different angle. And so with that in mind, that on occasion can create a perception that there's a gap when the reality is there isn't. One example is, we'll use brand awareness as an example, that the question could be, are you aware of, say, a list of brands, and maybe the brand that you're addressing in your research is part of this list, and you're just going to see if people are aware of the brand just in a listed format. They can click on it. And so now you know, for people off the top of their head, it's not unaided, obviously, because they're going to see it, but it's aided, but nothing's led them along this path yet. It's typically done early on in the survey. And then later on, maybe you introduce the brand. You might ask a couple questions about it, but maybe before you do that, you might ask a direct question about, how familiar are you with brand X, which is the brand you're considering? And it'll be scaled, 4 or 5 point scale, that, from very familiar to not at all familiar. What this does, this type of question now introduces some nuance to your research, where you can look at levels of familiarity against some of the other measures that you're going to ask about the brand, or some of their behaviors in the category. So it gives you some of that subtlety versus just a yes, no. But what happens is, in many cases, the client may ask you, why is there such a big difference between awareness and familiarity? Why is that? And the reason is how they were asked and when they were asked, and the opportunity for them to provide more nuance about the brand. So that's going to seem like a gap, but it really isn't. There's no gap in information there. There are two different questions asked two different ways. And again, the results from those two items are used very differently in the research. So that's one of those areas where we have all the existing information within the study, and we don't need to do anything else other than make sure we're very clear with the client about why you see that difference. The other is times that when we might see a gap in the research is that the client may want to look at the results in a very different way than what you had mapped out originally. And they may want to really get into the weeds on some items. And even though what you've done initially sums that up for them and it accomplishes what you wanted to with your research, they may want to, and a lot of times this happens in working with marketing and communications agencies, especially, where they'll ask for some of these other post measurements that, again, don't necessarily relate directly to what you've already done. And again, sometimes these don't line up. And we've had this happen in situations where we'll do discrete choice analysis, which is the most powerful way of figuring out like what is most and least important to consumers in whatever sector it is. It could be campgrounds, it could be products, it could be food, it could be anything. But it's the most powerful way of doing that because they're making trade-offs. It's really a very potent technique. But then the client may want you to do some rankings. I just want to see them ranked against each other so that we can ask maybe some follow-up with that. And you do that even though you might forewarn them that their rankings may look different because the methodology was very different. And the discrete choice was the more powerful way of doing that. And so now what you have is the challenge of explaining why that happens, why there might be a difference in the post, that secondary analysis. And now you have to go back in and re-ground your efforts into how it was done and why it was done that way. And in this case, what you do is you remove those rankings and just look at independently at the post measurements, so that don't look at where this item was ranked, look at what they said about it, because the ranking came from the discrete choice. So we're not going to focus on the rankings at all. So now what was first interpreted as a gap, a potential gap, is not a gap. It's non-existent because we've already done that. But now we have these other measurements that still tie to those items. And that, again, it's all based on existing information. I would say the other issue with gaps is at times you may have to go do additional work. You may have not asked the right questions. It can happen. Maybe your list that you used, that you wanted people to select from, wasn't adequate. Maybe the context was all wrong and how you framed it. And in these cases, the best thing to do is own it and say, let's do some more research. Let's go back in and fill these gaps in. Sometimes you don't need to have a gigantic research effort to do that either. It can be a matter of finding a select group of people. Maybe you do some interviews. Maybe you run an online focus group, discussion group, or again, maybe just talk to some people one-on-one. Or maybe you do some observational work to help fill those gaps. But either way, if you have to go back out, make sure you really think it through adequately so that, again, go through the stages. These aren't, in our business, they can be the stages of grief, where you're looking at a situation where someone may interpret your results as having a gap, and it's up to you to figure out how to fill that. And again, go through the process, go through it exhaustively, make sure you've done everything to button it up.
Awesome. And then just real quick, Scott, just for the viewers and everything, can just in just like 2 quick segments, how would you just really summarize that whole segment up if someone was just looking at it for right now?
My whole summary would be start from scratch, go through everything, go through the whole process again. As we've talked about in the past, we have an exploratory approach to our research. Explore and keep exploring and do what it takes to fill the gaps so that you and your client have confidence in the results and you feel good about it.
Awesome. No, that was a great summary. Thanks for that. Moving into kind of question 2 here. So, Scott, how can you stop missing data or blind spots in your strategy from the get-go?
That is the $1,000,000 question. It is. What you try to do is use your experience to make sure that you hit on everything. And typically when you're developing your questionnaire, write down everything. It's easier to, and I go through this, anyone who's ever worked with me will tell you the same thing. I tell them to put down everything. It's easier to eliminate items than it is to add them back in. Again, so if someone says, for example, I'm not sure if we need this question, my question to them is maybe we should include it. And if the question doesn't provide anything meaningful, that's okay. We've asked it, we've asked the question. Rather than at the end saying, gee, I really wish we would have kept that question in. So do that. Err on the side of including more. And I know that there's going to be a lot of pressure to cut items, to shorten your questionnaires, to shorten the process. I would just advise to be very careful in doing that, because again, you're better off, and even from a financial perspective, of including more than having to go back in and redo it. And especially if you're the researcher and you have to go back in and redo it, it could be on your dime. That could be money out of your pocket to do that. That's why I definitely advise people, keep it in. We're gonna keep it in. Again, if it's a throwaway, it's a throwaway. And there are people out there who may see this and disagree with me. That's fine. But there's good reasons why I say that. And anyway, that process is typically going to help you avoid any of those pitfalls. You're going to make sure you went through it. And especially if you empower your team and your clients to do that, you're going to have a much more open discussion. You're going to have a much better idea of their goals and objectives. And there are times that people will say, you tell me you're the expert. And I'm like, I will tell you. You have to worry about that. But I also want to know from you because what we're doing this work for is for a client, for someone, a business partner, helping them achieve what they need to from this research. And they're the ones that are going to tell us what's needed. So bring them into the process. Bring them all in. And I can hear people out there going, oh no, it gets bogged down. And it does. It does. But again, you're better off doing that than having, at the end of the day, having someone on that team go asking, gee, why didn't you ask me? I really wanted to ask this question. Or our department could have really used this information. This was a great opportunity to do it. Those are things you don't want to have to answer, whether as a researcher or if you're the person at the company who's hiring us to do the work, because you're the one that's probably going to have to hear about it more than us. So again, bring them in, bring people in, make sure you've done it. And again, I'll say it 100 times, that the more you do that, the less likely you are to have any gaps in your work. And I stand by that, because we typically don't get a lot of questions like that in our work.
Awesome. No, I think that's actually invaluable for a lot of people to hear. Awesome. Thank you for that. So, Scott, what techniques help fill gaps using inference, interviews, or proxy data?
All of those can be used. It depends on the situation. I would say proxy data in many cases is probably the most susceptible to misinterpretation, simply because it depends. If it was a research already done through the same organization in the same similar setting, that you could consider that. But I think, to me, the most powerful thing you can do is find ways within the data set itself to fill the gaps, as I talked about initially, and secondarily to use other methods of filling the gaps, which would be, I like the idea of doing interviewing people, select people maybe from the groups that you really are most interested in, that are most relevant, and doing some interviewing the topic a little bit. That to me is a real potent way of helping to fill those gaps. You can bring that information in. And also, if the study itself didn't have a qualitative component to it, now you've introduced that, and that can be really powerful. And it also may give you the opportunity to tag on some of the questions that you or someone else on the team was interested in that maybe got cut. And it gives you that opportunity to talk to people and have that conversation. That to me is a great way to approach that. And then the other way is doing an additional study itself, additional survey to fill that in. That has its challenges, especially if you have to recontact the same people. You're not going to get all of them to answer. And you're also, if you're not doing it with the same people, then you're going to have to find very similar people to answer that question or questions. It's not saying that information isn't valid, but it's almost like doing another survey because you have to go through all the screeners and the demographics and stuff like that. It's almost like replicating the study again, and that can be pretty expensive and labor intensive. But it may be your only solution. And again, your client is going to help to lead the charge on that. To me, that's what the pecking order of those items would be. But yeah, sometimes it's an like I said, sometimes it's an opportunity. Use that qualitative work, those interviews to go out and really dig into the topic a little bit more. It'll liven up your final results too.
Awesome. So if I'm hearing that, you're saying for a lot of these situations, going back and doing the live interviews helps you really fill these gaps, correct?
Absolutely. It's a very potent way of doing that, of filling those gaps. Again, you have to evaluate the situation. If that measurement is used, for example, if there is some used to extrapolate to the general population, or they want to do market estimations or something like that, you're going to have to go back out. Sorry, it's just the way it is. But in most situations, you're not going to do that, because those measures, if they want to extrapolate or use it in some sort of market prediction incidents, then you hopefully already covered those, because that would have been a big part of the research from the get-go. Usually these things are just, the gaps typically are just, they just need a little bridge. They just need a little bridge to bring them together. And I think if you get a little bit creative, you can definitely do it. You can do it without it hopefully causing too much stress.
Definitely. And that would be the goal.
Yes.
So Scott, moving along here. So what's the difference between not enough data and the wrong data?
Oh, the biggest difference there is not enough typically means it alludes to some of the stuff we've already talked about here, that it didn't do a good job of writing your questionnaire or your interview guide. You didn't hit all the objectives. Not enough just means that you needed to expand a little bit further. The good part of that is what you have is good. It's still good. But if it's wrong, then you got to start from scratch. You just got to start over. And I've done that before. And was not my fault. If there's fault to the point, fingers here. The client funded all the follow-ups, but it was a lot. It was a lot. So if things are wrong, one of the things I talk about a lot is, at the end of the day, you and your client want to have confidence in the results. If you lose that confidence, you need to start over. You need to capture that and do what's necessary, because even if the data are correct, if people don't have confidence in it, its value is diminished. So you need to make sure that everyone has confidence in those results. If something's wrong, it has to be corrected. And I've been through just about every scenario you could imagine in this industry, and I could probably write a book about these kinds of things. And just one anecdote was, when online research was first being introduced, our organization hired an outside programmer. And we had different modules. People were asked similar questions, but they were in different modules for the client's different branches. And when we were developing our report, we noticed that one group, the results were horrible. So low, it was and it really stood out because everybody else's results were pretty much in line. But this one department, it wasn't. And we spent all this time going through, like, why is this? What's going on? What's going on with this department? Why is everything just so low? And we went through the data a bunch of times. I went through everything possible. And then I picked up the phone and I called the programmer and I said, could you check something for me? Could you check on this module and tell me how the scales were coded? Was it 1 being the lowest and 5 the highest, or the opposite? And he goes, oh, they're reversed. And that was his answer. And that was our answer. You have to pay attention to that stuff. The data set was wrong, but we just need to recode it. And then it was right. You have to fix it. You have to figure it out. You have to do whatever it takes. In that case, we had to stop trying to explain it and figure out what caused this. And sometimes that's what you have to do, is go back in and find those things. Do some diagnostics. Look at it. Make sure it makes sense. Look for those gaps. We had an issue with a program. The program itself was combining values like in this strange way. And the only reason we found it was because it didn't make sense when we looked at it. And so you have to do that. You have to do your due diligence and find those things and fix them.
It sounds like you have a lot of stories to tell and a lot of background. So maybe there's a book on the horizon?
Maybe.
Maybe we'll see. Awesome, Scott. Wrapping things up for today. One last question here. So how does Cairn Consulting Group help clients move forward confidently and even navigate ambiguity?
What we do is we work really closely with people. We make it highly collaborative. Sometimes people don't want that, but we make sure it happens because we know that the more collaboration you have, the better everyone's going to feel about it. That's one of the things that I think is just, as a researcher, I would highly recommend against just going out and, for example, developing a questionnaire and telling your client, this is it, and it does everything you need. Don't do that. Say, I've taken the first shot at the questionnaire. I'd really love the input from you and your team on it. Take it, go through it with a fine-tooth comb. Let's, have a dialogue about it. Go through every question, tell me what you think. That's the conversation you have. And that's how you build confidence in your clients, because they're going to feel part of the process and you want them to be. And that's how you're going to avoid all those pitfalls. Again, just make sure that you do that and make sure that they know that you know what you're talking about. It's have confidence in what you're doing. If you are going to go against something that they suggest, just do it with confidence. Again, you're the expert. Make sure that they understand that and they'll respect it. And if they insist, then do it. Then just do it. They're paying you. Do it, but make sure you've just documented that with them that you disagree. And that's fine. People disagree all the time. And it's part of that process. But have confidence what you do. Make sure that they understand that you're the expert and you know what you're doing. And that at the end of the day, your goal is to give them what they need to move forward. And that you won't stop until they do. And that message also needs to be very clear, that they understand that what you're doing for them isn't just, I'm just going to dump a report on you and say bye. No, we're going to make sure that this is what you need. And there's been many instances where I've worked with people for weeks on looking at the data from different angles and developing different visuals and developing a different storyline based on their needs, maybe based on the department that they're going to present to and their audience, whether it's a group of salespeople or the executive team. Again, it's ongoing and you're there, and again, you're offering that and making sure that they understand it. And then they'll have confidence in what you're doing, and it'll make your process a lot better.
Awesome. As always, thank you so much, Scott. And thanks all for joining us today for another episode of Data Lens from Cairn Consulting Group. Today, we covered data gaps and data ends, how to move forward when the numbers don't tell the whole story. So don't forget to leave a comment or a question for next week's episode. Hit that like button if you like what you see. And as always, subscribe so you never miss a thing. Have a great day, everybody. Later.
Bye.